Hello there, and welcome to Weekend's Web App, the stream where we code a complete web app live. This is day 6, and if you're following along at home, you can clone down the repository, the github.com/weareoffsider/weekendswebapp. If you've cloned down that repository, you'll be able to get to the exact same code that we're on right now by checking out day 5. Check out day 5. Now, where we left off at the end of day 5 is we implemented a little bit of our router using or our Redux state system. So just to refresh, Redux is a system for handling our in-memory state, the sort of the global state that we want everything to keep track of. And if we have a look here, if I click this increment button, you'll see that represented over here. These are our Redux dev tools, and they give us a good glimpse into what is actually changing in our app. And at the moment, it's only keeping track of a counter, but we're going to be doing more than that. You'll also see here, we've got a counter here, but that's not updating. However, if we went to the About page, you'll see that it updates with that there. And the reason for that is because we haven't actually made it so our routes can update in real time as the state changes yet. And that's what we'll be looking to fix today. And we'll also be looking to implement some parts of the router's state into Redux as well. So it'll start to look more like how we intend to use Redux going forward. So with that, we may as well get stuck into it. We're probably not going to have much whiteboard time this time. We're going to be going straight into code. So I'm going to get this out of the way, and I'm going to jump into our code. So where we left off, we were looking at routing/index.ts. And we're looking at some sort of system where likely the state comes in, we check if the loaded location has changed, and if the loaded location changes, we start loading the new route. And for all visible routes, we also need to send the new state to them so that they can update based on whatever is in place. So what we'll be looking to do is essentially write something that handles all of this stuff. But before we do that, we're going to implement the state side of things. And what I mean by that is, so if we look at state/index.ts, currently, when we talked about Redux before, we talked about the reducer, and this is our reducer here. And then we just create a state store. But this isn't really enough, right? We need the ability to put all these different bits of state from all these different parts of our application and put them into one store. So we need something a bit more mature than this if we're going to make use of Redux everywhere. So what we're going to explore is how to sort of formulate state for this router, and then how to bring that into our state store in a meaningful way. So we're going to just jump straight into looking at our routing and creating a state file for it. And pretty much every state file that we do for a particular domain is going to handle a couple of things. It's going to need a reducer. The reducer is what tells it what to do based on any particular action that comes in. It's going to require action creators. These are the things that are going to let a user interact with the web app. So we're going to need those action creators, or rather, these are the things that the rest of our code will call, whether it's our UI or particular functions or anything like that. That's what they're going to call to make something happen. We will also need just probably a collection of our, we'll need the initial state for this router. That's what we'll need. So we'll need the initial state for this particular region of state. And we'll probably need some tags for naming all of our actions. So we have these constants for decrement action, increment action, etc. We'll need tags for our other actions as well. So with that, let's take a quick look at routing and see what our current elements of our router state are. And keep in mind, some of these pieces of state we will not expose out into Redux. It's sort of an implementation detail. And the things I'm thinking of as an implementation detail are things like these view containers and whatnot. We really don't want to be putting that in Redux state because we don't want other things playing with them. But there are pieces of this state that I don't think are implementation details, and there's stuff like what the current location is, what we understand to be the current location. Possibly we'll put in the route name that got loaded. So whichever route matched, we'll get the name of that. We'll export the name of that router. That route will export the parameters for that route, so that if there's any sort of Chrome on the website, like in the header, like maybe some breadcrumbs or something like that, then we can access them from the global store. So yeah, we'll be pulling various variables out. Now, what else was in router state that we put here? So yeah, it was really only loaded locations, so not a whole lot. So let's start off with an interface called router state. And that interface is going to represent all of the things that we want to be available to sort of the whole application. So maybe we could do a loaded route name, or yeah, we can probably change this down the track. So I'm not going to get too wound up again getting this perfect straight away. So we've got the loaded route, we've got the loaded route params, which if you remember, key, string, string. That's the type of that one there. We also want, let's see. So this is when it's loading. We've got the current path. That will be just the path that's in the URL bar right now. Or if it's not the current path in the URL bar, our router will need to know to push state to get it into that place. So we've got the current path. And that may be enough for our interface. Now, if we're going to then have, say, an initial value for that, so now we're dealing with our initial state. Our initial state will be router state. And we will have a loaded route name of nothing, probably, because nothing will have been loaded at that point. And the loaded route params will also be nothing. But it'll tell us here we're missing our current path. So our current path is the last thing here, and this is going to be our window.location.path name. So that way it sort of initializes immediately to what we want it to be in the JavaScript. All right, so now we need to have ourselves a reducer. So if we structure our reducer a bit like how we currently structure index.ts, I don't think this is a great structure for a reducer, because eventually we don't want to have to sort of have this ever expanding if statement. But for the moment, this will do. Oopsie daisy, what am I doing? All right, so we need ourselves a reducer, and that's going to have a state. And it's always going to be a router state. So it's always going to look at the same shape as that router state up there. And by default, it's going to be the initial state. And it's going to have itself an action. And currently we have any. What I'm going to think is, I think I'm going to start to standardize these concepts. So instead, let's export ourselves an interface for actions. For a standard action, or we'll call them state actions. And by default, the only thing that they're guaranteed to have is a type of string. And then we will import it here. Sometimes it can be a bit hard to get TypeScript to play nice with the concepts of Redux, just because we've got a bit of indirection. But my hope is by the end of this, we'll be able to really clearly know whether we're doing the right things with our actions, and our TypeScript will let us know if that's the case, rather than waiting for it to crash in runtime. So I've got to back out and pick up state, and that should give us state action. So yeah, every action is going to be a state action at the least. Right. So inside this reducer, we're going to do things based on various actions, and we haven't actually figured out what those actions are. So let's do that right now. So change current path. We're just going to tag all of these with like router up front. And these will be constants. These will be identifiers for our actions that will allow us to sort of change it in one place rather than changing it in lots of places. So our other one is to change loaded route. And those will probably be enough actions. They're the main things that I can think of just this moment. We might come up across some more, but for the moment, that'll do. All right. So if action .type equals change current path, then let's just say that action.path is going to have something in it, right? So that action is going to have the .path variable on it, and we will use that to finish this off. In fact, we might keep this this as any just for now, just so I don't have TypeScript whinging at me. So we've changed current path. We're going to return. And now, if you recall from last time, we don't ever want to return exactly what the state is. So what we're going to do instead of that is we're going to use the object assign function to assign the state, and then on top of that, assign something with the new path, current path action.path. Oh, object is assigned. It doesn't. TypeScript isn't acting like it's there because I have to probably update my TS config. I'll just have a quick look into how I can get that in there. And what I might do is, I'll do this because eventually we were going to need some sort of file that talks about additional typing anyway. So I'm going to make an additional typings file. Just for when I need, our handy little TypeScript to play nice with us. It's probably still not going to recognize what I'm doing. No, not yet. Give me one moment. I'll just do target ES6. That'll probably do it. Yeah, target ES6 will do it. We'll just do that. All right, so I'm just appeasing the type gods there. We'll move on. So yeah, by doing object assign, essentially what this function is something that takes an argument, such as the first argument, and then keeps on layering those things on top. So object assign starts like this, and then it takes the existing state, whatever it is, and puts it in the object. So it would look, if we were to take this, it would look like this. So it would lay that in, and then finally it would lay in the current path and action path. And what that would end up doing is overriding this property here and turning it into action.path. That way, because we started from a blank object, we end up with a whole new object, which means nothing is sort of like it retains the immutability of what Redux is expecting. So that's why we're going to use object assign for this this particular aspect. Now we also need to handle action.type equals route, change loaded route. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to use loaded route name as action.name, and loaded route name, loaded route params is action.params. And now we're going to bring in a new concept of action creators. So the idea is this reducer will accept some actions, and we need some functions that will create these actions. So before, if you look at state, let me close that. If we look at state/index.ts, oh, that's interesting. Did it not like that? I wonder what happened that made it decide to do that. clear this out and see if that you know, we're going to soldier on regardless, as long as things are still compiling, which they are. So we're all good. Right. So carrying on with that, if you've got this idea of an action, and at the moment in state/index.ts, you've got these actions that I've just made, right? Because they've got no arguments on them or anything like that. They've just got their type. But not all actions are like this. You usually have functions that want to create this action so that the reducer then can then accept it. And this is sort of the API of your Redux system. So for example, if we were to create a function, say, so we'll export a function and we'll call it change current path, right? So if we were to take that change current path function, it would probably accept a path, a string, right? And what that should return, in this very simple example here, what that should return is the type. So here we're going to use change current path, and then it's also going to return the path. So it could look like that, but because of shorthand, we can get away with just that, right? So we've made a very simple simple creator there, and we're going to make another very simple creator. And eventually you can end up with more complicated ones, but I mean, the simpler the better, really. So if we have change loaded route, and this time we have route name, and we have route params. And I'm partially doing this just to sort of put the get the point across that this will then, if we look at change loaded route, so the shape of this one will have the property of action.name and action.params, or rather, it'll have the property of name, which will be route name, and it'll have params, route params. Now, so now that we've got these creators set up, we need to have a way to make use of them, and sort of we're getting to the end of our sort of little bundle that we're going to need to provide to actually get anything done with this system. So let me think about how we're going to approach this. Right. So we need to put this into Redux somehow, right? We need to put together our system so that we're able to make use of these action creators and have them be sent off to Redux. And we also need to make sure that Redux has access to this reducer and can make use of it. And we also need this initial state. So what we're going to do is create this concept of a state bundle. And we're going to use, for TypeScript, we're going to use sort of a generic type. So it's bundle shape. That's just a variable that's sort of going to help explain what's going to go into it. So it's going to have the initial data, and that's going to be something in the type of bundle shape or bundle type, or rather state type. That's maybe better. We're going to have a reducer for it, and that's going to be a function which accepts and then accepts actions as well, so state action or any, and then returns state type. And then finally we're going to have our actions. There's some sort of bag of actions that represents sort of all of the things that we can do with this reducer, or rather this sort of state bundle. So I guess let me carry this on a bit further, and it will probably show what precisely I mean. So if the last thing we do is we export by default, so we don't export anything else by default but this state bundle, hang on, yeah, we'll export this default variable, which is going to be our state bundle. In fact, we don't need that for export default, I think. Or rather, it looks like this, doesn't it? Yeah, that's right. So what I might do instead actually is call it const state bundle. And then we're going to make use of it. And that's the state bundle with router state. Okay. All right, here we go. All right, now I'm feeling it. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to put inside it our reducer. We're going to put inside it our initial state. So that initial will be initial state. And then finally, we're going to put in our actions, but we're going to separate that out for type reasons. So let's do just that. So this is going to be our change current path function and our change loaded route function. Sorry, I'm just going to duck out from this recording for like 2 minutes. I'll be right back. I'm sorry for this. Alrighty, so we're back to it. This is pretty much everything we need to make use of this sort of bundle of state. And there's various patterns people use for is sort of putting things into Redux, but this is the one we're going to use for now to get us to a point where we can actually use this reducer in here. Right, so I guess what we need to do is try and make use of that. So let's say instead of creating state store where we just sort of do this, what if we could do something a bit more interesting with that? Let's say that if we went to app.ts and we decided to pull in our import from, where are we going to put that? We're going to pull our import in from routing/state. And so we're going to pull in the router state bundle. So that is in platform routing/state. So with this routing state bundle, what we're going to do instead of making use, just creating state store with an initial state. What we're instead going to do is pass it all of the different state bundles we want to give it. So we'll give it the router state bundle. And we're going to use Redux to, we're going to, in this function here, we're going to pull all the various state bundles we have and turn them into something useful. So we have our state bundles, and that's going to be an array, but another way of putting that is to go state bundle any, and then put the array marks, put the square brackets at the end of it. That's also, that is, just to be clear, that is the same as going array like that. But sometimes it's a bit nicer. So, since you make arrays of things so commonly, you've got this nice shorthand to use. Okay, now, in addition to that, I didn't close it off, right. Okay, so what this state store is now going to do, instead of just returning the store, I'm going to get it to restore the store and a bunch of actions. So const actions equals, or actions bundle, I guess we can call it. So that actions bundle is going to be returned, as well as the store, and that way we can make use of it to sort of do various things in our app. So here, instead of creating a reducer just straight from one thing, we're going to create a reducer that's from multiple things. And luckily, Redux handles that for us to a degree by giving us a function called combine reducers. Oopsie daisy. So we'll take a quick look at the documentation so that you can see what that means. Reducers. Hopefully this lands us straight in the documentation, which it does. Very good. I wonder if that's my internet or their internet. Probably their internet. For some reason, redux.js is very slow. I can use GitHub instead. There we go. So combine reducers. So the most common state shape for a Redux app is a plain JavaScript object containing slices of domain-specific data, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about slices of data. So our eventual store is going to be, our eventual data is going to be something like routing, and then or router or routing or something like that, and followed by the shape that we expressed over here, this current path, loaded path, etc. And then eventually we might have some other data. We might have localize, and then it's like inside it is language. Language, and we'll probably start off with English because that's the language I know, but there we go. So we've got a state. So these are slices of domain specific, each based on their top level key, which actually reminds us that we actually need another thing for our state bundle, and that is a name, a string. So we're going to give that to our reducer as well, that name, which is going to be, we'll make it routing. So combine reducers is simply a utility function to simplify the most common use case when writing Redux reducers, which is to bring all of these routing functions together and handle it and turn it into one top level routing function. So the beauty of this is that we can simply make our main reducer by going all we need is a set of reducers, each of them with a key. So we would have something like routing, and then routing reducer, and then localize reducer. But we want to do it in such a way that we're building it out with these state bundles. So instead of that, what we're going to do is have const reducer set. We're going to throw it together like that, and then we're going to iterate over our bundles. So for each state bundle. We're always going to get a state bundle entity, so we don't actually have to give it the type. So for each of those state bundles, we're going to add to our reducer set. And yep, we'll add to the reducer set, and that'll be state bundle.name equals state bundle.reducer. So it throws that reducer onto the state bundle. And then finally, down here, we're going to combine the reducers. You combine the reducers using the reducer set. Bring them all together. Each of these slices is going to come together, although we only have one slice right now. Next up is this initial data. This initial data is also going to live in an object, or initial state rather, and we can add to that by taking the state bundle.name again, but this time transplanting the initial onto it. So that's going to serve as our initial state there. And that gives us this, but it doesn't give us our actions bundle, because the thing about the actions is we can't just provide these functions as they are, because you'll notice that these functions don't really do anything. These action creators, all they do is return an action. They don't actually apply it to the store. What we could do to do a little better than that is we could, for each of those functions, we could put them onto the actions bundle and sort of just wrap it. We'll do something really simple to wrap it, and eventually we'll probably do something a little bit more complex. But for now, let's say that we're going to go over these. Now we have to go over it after the store because we need the store available to dispatch to. So for each of these state bundles, we're going to go back around again, and this time we're going to iterate over all of the actions that are attached to it. So we're going to go object.keys. I'll show really quickly what that does. So object.keys is a really simple function that takes an object. We have 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and returns back the keys. It's a very easy way to then map over a function, because then you can map over the key themselves and then get the item out that you need. So it's usually when we're mapping over an object, we're probably going to be using object.keys or some variation thereof. Anyway, back to the code. So we're going to run object.keys over the state bundle.actions. Let me get rid of this. So we need a little object for the bundle actions. We're not kind of worrying about types right now because we'll get back to it at some point, but not super important to me right now. So each of these keys, they are strings, will allow us to iterate over them. So when we're iterating over this one, it's going to give us change current path and then change loaded route, because those are our state actions that got passed in. So what we're going to do with them is we're going to get the function. So we'll pull that action creator with const func, state bundle dot actions, and then accessor against it for the key. So that gives us our function, and what we want to do is make it so that we can call this function and end up with store dot, and I'll move everything down so that we can actually see what's going on. So we want to be able to call this function so that we dispatch into the store. And the way we can do this is we could make, say, so if we can add to bundle actions a function with the same name, or the same key rather, we're going to make ourselves a function that takes arguments. Did I do this the right way around? No, I didn't. So this lovely thing is called the spread, is a spread parameter. And what that means is no matter how you call this function, so say we went func1, 2, that would then mean that args equals 1, 2. If we were to call func 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then it would do exactly the same thing. It would, oopsie daisy, it would take all of the arguments and put them into an array. And that means that you can work with literally all of the arguments in one. There are natural ways in JavaScript to do this because it always had the arguments variable, which was like just sort of a default thing that would let you access all of the function arguments. But this way makes it a bit more explicit and allows you to do things like, say, like argument 1, argument 2, and then put the remaining arguments in that ... arg spread argument. Anyway, why would we do this? Because we want any function, we want to be able to call the function with those arguments like this. And then we want to give it to the store. So it ends up being that our function to do all of this together would be store.dispatch func args like that. So all we're doing is taking this function, these two functions here, and wrapping around them a little, just a little wrapper that dispatches all this. And we'll probably need more information here because eventually these action creators might need a little bit more work to might need a little more information to actually do their work, or they might need to do some things asynchronously. And there are lots of ways to do this with Redux, but I try to sidestep a lot of it and just say, if we want to write asynchronous code, we'll just write asynchronous code and we'll figure out a better way to do it. But for now, this will be enough just to demonstrate the point of getting the state into the system. So once we've created this, this bundle of actions, then we put that onto the actions bundle. State.name equals bundle actions. State bundle here, I meant to say. All right. So this ends up being our assembly function. So we start off by assembling our reducer and our initial state. And then after that, we create our little actions bundle, and then we export the lot so that then we can use it in our application. This is sort of like, this will do this, and now essentially our counter is irrelevant. So if we wanted to make a little bundle for the counter, which we sort of need to do if we're going to do this properly. So maybe I'll just make it, because I want everything else to still be usable. So let's really quickly make ourselves some functions for this. So function increment count, and all that's going to do is return increment action. We're going to make a function for decrement count. Okay, we've got our reducer, our initial state. So if we make a const for count initial equals count 0, and then we export state bundle, count state bundle. So we're doing exactly the same pattern. Pardon me. We're doing exactly the same pattern yet again. So we're taking our. So we've got our state bundle. I'm going to do something a bit tricky here and go type of count initial to get the type in there. So we're going to take our state bundle. Oh. And then we need all of the information here. So we need name, counter. We need a reducer, which is going to be this reducer here. We need the initial, which is going to be count initial. And we need the actions, which are going to be, just going to slap them in there, increment count and decrement count. Why does this think of this? Oh, right. It's because there is no space there. Count const. Now it's all happy. All right. So const, we'll call it the counter state bundle. So the idea of this is this way so we can keep our counter running. So the way we do that is we'll grab it from this export here. So instead of doing increment action and decrement action, we're going to grab the counter state bundle. And we're going to supply that to the state store as well. Now, I'm going to get rid of these. And before we do anything, we're just going to make sure that this sort of works. And I need to pull the store and the actions bundle out here. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure this sort of works. And do we have any? I'll just ignore the type errors for now. And if I have problems here, then we can address them. So it looks like we have one problem, and I think I know exactly what that problem is. So here, if nothing happens, it's meant to still return the state. So just at the end of the condition, we just return state if we didn't return before it. So now we should end up with a state that loads. Okay, this doesn't actually affect the app at all at the moment, but what we'll see is that our state shape now looks like this. So we have the counter in one box and we have the routing in another. And at the moment, we've got that initial state, but we haven't done anything more with it. We haven't got any of this route loading happening. So where we go from here is we want our router to be listening to this and then act on information from this rather than acting information of its own accord. So that is what we do next. So let's take a look at what's about. Figure out a nice clean way. Now, considering we only have 20 minutes left, we might not get this hashed out in time, and we'll have to spend some more time on it tomorrow. But we'll also need to hash out the types anyway, so I'm not too concerned about that, to be perfectly honest. Now, so if we have ourselves our view element for the route stack, we have all that. And we need to initialize router, and we do have the store. So potentially we could do our subscribe here, but we also need the actions bundle potentially, so that it can call back whenever it needs to. Yeah, let's just do that. We'll allow ourselves these bits, and then what we'll do in addition. In fact, this actually might be a good test. So let's say state.counter.count. Before we worry about the actions bundle, the router side of things, let's just really quickly bind some actions. On click this increment button, just make sure this still works. So if I remember correctly, so our actions bundle has counter and then it has functions on it. So one of those is increment count. So whenever we click on the increment button, it's going to call this function, this counter.increment count. And that should, by all rights, because we've wrapped it down here, we should end up with an increment happening. And we'll end up with, we'll try and get the same thing for the decrement button. Right. So let's run that and just see if our counter works. Lo and behold. Okay, so we do have our state bundle sort of working as we expected it to. We've got that actions bundle and it's got all of the different actions attached to it. So, I mean, if we wanted to, we could call something like, say, actions bundle dot routing dot change loaded route, go route name, and then we'll feed it route param dot something, just anything. I just want to see if it will pass in through the route through to the store, and you can see that right there. So our actions bundle does work, so we just need to make use of it, right? So let's see if we can slap out something pretty quick and make that actually work as we intend it to. So we'll jump into index, and this whole initialize set, what we're going to do is, instead of calling update view every single time a thing happens, What we're instead going to do is make update view the response to a store update. So what do I mean by that? I mean that if we give it the store, and if we subscribe, have the actions bundle as well. Again, we're going to go any type just for now, because we'll bear this out with a bit more information down the track. So yeah, instead of calling update view directly, we are going to call store.subscribe. And then as a response to that, every single time, we're going to update view with the state, with store.getState. And yeah, the router state, that's about it. Okay, but this router state, we're gonna approach this a bit differently when it comes to the router state. Yeah, we're probably not even gonna have a router state. We might have some internal state, but yeah, we'll need some internal state anyway. So I'm gonna still have the router state. The reason we still need some internal state is because I want to still keep track of all the view elements, the ones that are active and whatnot, and I can't do that unless I've got router state in place. But all of these ones, so anytime it calls update view, what it's going to do instead of doing the thing that it did is it's going to call the actions bundle and routing, and then call, which function do we want to call? We want to call, if we're looking at routing./state, we want to call change current path, because that's a directive to go and do the thing that I asked you to do. So change current path. So we're changing the current path to anchor.href. Oh, no, okay. We'll probably just use window.location.path name. This is probably going to be a little bit rough to start off with, but you're probably used to that by now. Same thing happens here. Same thing happens here. We immediately change path to that one there. Now for the router state here, last container, active containers. Which is just going to be an array of elements here. Right, so we haven't loaded anything yet. And we're just going to update view every time and pass it the router state, and we'll also pass it the actions bundle. Again, bit rough, but what we want to do is whenever the router is loaded, we want it to call back and say, hey, yep, I've got it, so that we can go from there. So what do we got? Route stack, store.getState, and it doesn't like it because the function's too complex. Okay. Now, unfortunately, we've got a few things that route stack is going to... So we do actually need an idea of what is the... We sort of do need the concept of the current path, because we need to know whether our internal concept of the route has changed, because we can't have this try and load a new page every single time. There needs to be something that it can really quickly check to say, oh, yep, I haven't actually got that route yet. Can we not do anything yet? And that something is going to be the current location. So let me just tease this out a bit, and then we'll see what we're looking at. As I said, we're probably going to have to clean things up a wee bit. So we've got route stack there, store.getState, router state, and actions bundle. We've got the app state, and we've got the actions bundle down here. Okie dokie. So, first of all, we've got this aspect here. We've got this current location palaver. I'll just ignore that just for now. So what we know is that if So this concept of new containers, all of this code in here is stuff that happens if something has changed, right? In fact, all the way down to here. This is all if route changed, do this stuff. Right from here. So if I indent that and go something like if router state dot current path does not equal what is it? App state dot routing dot current loaded path. Is it current path? My bad. Change current path. Yeah, current path. If that current path, if the current paths do not match up, then it's time to go on this little wild ride here where it loads a new route. Now, if it is matched, then all it needs to do is iterate over all the containers and update them appropriately. And that's where it gets a little tricky because we need to keep track of what route is attached to which one. So it's more like a route element pair sort of thing going on there, and sort of thinking out loud here. But so with this router state, with these active containers, they're not just the HTML element, but they're also the route itself. So if we're thinking of an interface here, we've got a route container, or a router container, and what that needs, router container state maybe, that'll do. What that will have is one route path. So the route path has the name, the match, the preload, and the render. So that has everything we arguably should need to be able to re-render that view, right? And what we also need is the containing element. And that'll be a HTML element. So now we've got active containers, which is going to be an array of router container state. And maybe last container should be a route container state as well. Now, where do we do from here? So we've got router active containers, and we've got current path. And we'll just put that as that. Or in fact, we'll put that as undefined because that way it knows always to do something straight away. So this question mark here in the type means it's allowed to not have that string, which is what we want. So this is looking a little hairy right now, like type errors everywhere and all that sort of palaver, but we'll get there. Okie dokie. So I'm going to remove this check. So yeah, we've got this check here. Now this only happens if we're due to change as well. So we've got this concept of the last container. So new view container. Right, okay, yeah, excellent. So const container state is going to have a few concepts here. So the container state for this one that's going on the stack right now, it's going to have a route, which is the current matched route. No, not yet. It could be the matched route, but for the moment it's null. I'll make that a question mark so that it's allowed to be. Because it might not match, in which case it doesn't actually have any route attached to it. And then we also have the container element. So, oh gee, I already forgot what I was going to put there. Container, there we go. So this container is going to be the view element. So that's our container state. And this one here, if there was a last container, that's the way it would work. So it's going to go through this load. It's going to add this particular thing to the router state. So router state dot active containers. We're going to push on that container state. And in order to clear these out, cleanly, we're going to clear them off of this container state as well by using, so here we'd have to remove it elsewhere, so never mind me. So we're going to add that state there, and then we're going to have a look down here and see here where it removes that element. So instead of doing it like that, again, we've got this concept of a container. I'm going to pull that out. And TypeScript is kind of helping here because it's letting me think less. And here we've got this last container as a new view container. So I guess that technically works, but that's not quite here. We need to go container state instead. So I'm just going to keep up with these types. This will probably make more sense once I get through it, so bear with me for just a moment. Now, I'm not 100% sure whether this code will work, but I want to run it and then verify some assumptions. So let's do just that. Okay. We did not run because the store has not been updated. What if we click this? There we go. Okay, so it did actually start paying attention after I did that, but it doesn't know what to do once we start to get into things. So we need to handle a few of those cases. So we need to update current path to equal app state routing current path as soon as we start acting on it. And I'll go back to here. Drop in we've got the initializing function, so we can certainly see if we're initializing, and it doesn't look like we are, and the main reason for that is because we're not actually calling anything at the start of this router. So when we take this update view function, and I think we'll go just a wee bit later so I can get this properly locked down, and then we'll go through the process of actually cleaning it up afterwards during our next stream. Okay, so we've got our rendering happening, and we can increment and nothing happens, which is sort of what we expected. We can click about, and we can end up on that about page, but that does not render properly. So there's something happening incorrectly when it comes time to transfer to the next view. And we can certainly have a look and see what that something is. Now, whenever we back out and remove these, do we have a return? Why do we have a return there? Ah, the discarding of loading. Yep. Okay. We also have problems with current location here. Oh no, that's all good. Yeah, we'll have to see this through to actually get this working the way I envisaged, and it's a bit confusing at the moment, and I'm sorry for that. But we'll just have to grin and bear it for a bit. So when we change path, we can see that we've got /about/, but we don't. We've got the rendering of route about, but it never actually renders anywhere, and we need to find out where that element is that we're missing. So we don't see anything in there. So it must be somewhere in there, and I guess what's happening is probably we're losing our view element at some point. So what happens the first time we render? So we've got our main view, we've got the div data out. Okay, so something strips that out, and that's what we need to deal with here. So the last container, let me just take a moment to figure out where I'm at. view element. Ah, that's of course rookie error. Okay, that should be new view container. And then what we'll probably end up with is something rendering. We are now at 1 hour. I'm going to crack on a little bit longer, however, so that I can see this through. So now if I click about, yep, we can change views successfully. You can see this count is undefined, but that's mainly because it's just referring to the wrong variable. Okay, everything works, but what we need to have now is we need to have the actual state inside each of these these elements update correctly. And to do that, I'm just going to make sure that we actually reference the variable properly. So I'll just go through and update each of these variables. So now with any luck, that should no longer be undefined. You can see that the count is 0. So what we now need is for every single time this happens, we need for all of the active containers to get updated properly. And we also need to, when we remove one of these elements, we need to remove that particular active container. And we will do that by going through and taking the new view container. My apologies, let me think. All right, yeah, so this is the one, this is the part here where if it's not the right one, we can discard it, we get rid of it. So this is where an active container, router state, active containers, dot filter. So essentially filter out all of the containers that are not this one. Yeah, that's it. So container state. So we want to pull out the container state whenever we're pulling out a particular one. So here, down here with this leaving element, we want to filter that one out. So the router state, active containers, and unfortunately because it's it's actually fortunate because it's not mutable, but, or not a mutation function, we need to call it like this. So we're going to do the same thing here, except this time we're testing against leaving element. And this one. And then how many more do we have? We have this removal just here, which is the same same as this one here. Alright, so now, so that little bit I added is just to get rid of our list of active containers. And what I'll do to drive that point home is I'll go, and every time we're initializing a new route, I'll console log out the route to state. And every time we discard, I'll also console log out the router state. Daisy, okay. Okay, so if I console log this, as I jump into here, you'll see the active containers, and you'll see only one active container. And it's this particular div here. For a very short while, it'll have other active containers in it. Not this one, let's see here where the active containers this because of the way it is, it's actually updating every single time I do it because I'm mutating it. So you just have to take my word for it, I guess, that the length changes every time this goes. So there'll be a short period where there's 2 active containers. That's when there's 2 out there, and then just before it swaps over, gets rid of it. And in fact, what I can do is I can drop myself a breakpoint just to illustrate that fact. So if I jump in right after the preload takes place, so if I click on home, right here is where if I typed in router state, I would find an array with 2 elements in it. So one would be the div that you're currently seeing, and one would be the one that's about to load. Okay, and that will then get populated. Okay, so we're actually really close, even though it doesn't feel like it necessarily, and I'm just piling on the complexity. We're actually really close. Once we match a route, and that's what happens right here, is we've matched our route. At that point, we can put that route on the matcher. And we'll actually need to keep track of the parameters as well. So route params, and that'll be an any for now. So right here, right after here, is when we can guarantee that we have ourselves a route. And at that point, we can take the container state and we can pop the route on it. So that will equal route. So this guy right here. And in addition to that, container state dot route params will equal view params. Will it now? Why does it not have it in its state? Route path. Maybe I've picked the wrong bit to grab here. Ah, that is why. So we've got route path, and let's give it a type so that it plays nice. So it's an active container. Route container state. All right, very nearly there. Been saying that for a while, I know. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in here something that's going to take the router state, look at all the active containers, and for each of them, it's going to re-render them based on what I have available. So we need to be at a point where the route is loaded before that is allowed. So we might wait until we've actually got a loaded route before we even do this. Right here. And right here. So now for each of these route states, so container state is our buzzword here. And what we're going to do is with each of these, we're just going to go over them and take their container element. And in fact, what I might just do is just copy over that basic render concept. Actually, what we can do is we can avoid some complexity just by keeping that out for now. Put that there, and instead we will only render the route if it's a successful render. So what we're going to do is we're going to have container state here, dot route path dot render. The view container is going to be container state dot container state dot route params, and then finally the app state down the end. And with any luck, this might actually be something that works for us. I'll get rid of that debugging point. Okay, we got a render, and now it took a little while to get there, but now we've actually got that state rendering through. So every single time the state comes through, it's only going to load something new if the current path changes, but otherwise you can see that state is flowing through. So you can see here we're on entry 1, now we can see it's updating. If we click through, you'll see it's still updating even while it's active, but then it picks up here. There is some weirdness there when it first loads because it's actually using the old app state there, but we will deal with that eventually. Now, I'm at a point where I don't feel like this is clean code at all, so I think our next session is definitely going to be making this a whole lot nicer. But I'm sort of glad I got to this point because it's as good a point as any to stop. But at this point, we need to clean up what we've been working on and make it make more sense, because we're already getting quite unwieldy. We've got about just under 300 lines of code, and they're just not very good lines at the moment. So we need to get them to a point where we can actually work with them, understand them in sequence. And there are a few features missing here as well because of the way the updating happens. We need to deal with those cases as well. So we're not quite done here. But we're in a decent place where at least we can carry on and not feel like we've completely ruined our code base. And the benefit is once this state is sorted out, this will be a nice sort of isolated area where we can add new functions in, new views that actually do something with all of this information. I think that pretty much covers it for today. So I'm going to make up a commit. Now, if there's any questions or anything like that, please ask in the chat or hit me up on Twitter. And if there's any questions before I end the stream, I'll answer them. Otherwise, we'll be stopping in just a moment. So yeah, this commit was a bit of a mess. It was a bit all over the place today, but we will get there. Day 6. Begin bringing Redux state into our routing. Find reduces demonstrated. Is that everything? Yes, very good. And I think what we'll be doing when we tidy this up, part of it will be getting to the code to the point where it sort of makes more sense. It's got nice types around it, and sort of the order that things happen in can start to make sense. Because currently our router function is trying to do a lot of stuff all in one place. If we break that up into various functions, it will potentially be a lot easier to understand, properly document those functions, and that's what we'll probably be looking to do, is not really trying to progress next session we have next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Instead of trying to progress, what we're going to do is take our code and turn it into something that we can understand. Because at the moment, it's at this point where even I'm having trouble reading it, and it doesn't matter whether you wrote it or someone else wrote it. It's very easy to arrive at a point where suddenly you just don't understand your own code, and that's usually a good sign that you need to fix something. And what we're going to be trying to do is, now that we've done a bunch of exploration, we've got something that works, but we don't have it working well. So now we're going to compress down to a good solution that achieves the same things while being not nearly as verbose. So that pretty much covers it. I've pushed all of that code up to the repository, so you're more than welcome to clone that down. And we'll be back at Tuesday, 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thanks for watching.